Well, thanks for joining me again in the Storycraft Cafe. I am super excited today to have two writers with me, Glasgow, excuse me, and Elizabeth Lawson. They have co-written a new book that will be releasing soon, and it's called The Agathas. And this was so much fun. I read it last week, and this is a book that everyone is going to have on your reading table beside your favorite comfy reading chair. I love it so much. I know you will too. Welcome, Kathy and Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hank. It's nice to talk to you today.
You too. So we've been starting these shows with a fun question, and I'm going to ask each of you, and we'll start with you, Kathy, because you're on my left, and Elizabeth, you'll have a minute to think about it, so you have the benefit of that. What is one piece of writing advice that you have gotten? Maybe it's a tremendous piece of advice that you look back on often and say, that was a really great piece, or maybe it's horrendous, and you look back and go, "Wow, I'm so glad I didn't, do that," or whatever. What's a piece of advice that you've gotten that has stuck with you for good or bad?
So years ago when I was in a writing program,
Yeah.
and I went to graduate school for poetry and not for fiction, but I did take fiction classes, and one of my professors, who was a novelist, MJ Fitzgerald, she told us that you really don't know how to write a book until you've written your eighth book. And and then we're all in there and none of us we don't have books out and we're just starting out. And that seemed really daunting at the time.
Yeah.
But now that with the Agathas, I'm 4 books in, I kind of see that because every book you learn a little bit more about how to structure the story that you want to tell.
Sure.
And you've learned more tips and tricks about your personal writing style. So I see exactly what MJ Fitzgerald was talking about. And I actually don't like telling people that because then they get very freaked out because they're like, I just need to finish my first book. But I do think that there's a lot of merit in that. And I think the second piece of, I'll give you a second one, piece of writing advice I got was turn everything else off when you're writing. You have to turn off your phone, your social media, your email, and most importantly, you need to turn off that voice in your head that tells you
The
that you're,
self-editor.
yeah, yeah, and you just need to get that story out. You have to really learn what works for you to turn off that inner editor.
Love it. That's fantastic. What about you, Elizabeth?
I, I'd say it's something that I didn't really believe until very recently, which is that
Oh, this is going to be good.
Yeah, Liz always has good stuff.
your first draft is allowed to be a pile of crap. And I heard it so many times over the years and I never believed it because I tend to be a perfectionist and I tend to want to like fill in all the blanks immediately.
Yeah.
But particularly with this book, we have done, I think, a good job while we were writing it because we had to kind of fast draft it. And I think we did a pretty good job with being kind of loose with our first draft in terms of like saying, what is this person's name? We'll come back to it instead of spending 20 minutes hunting it down in the draft itself. And just sort of like letting the first draft be sort of, the skeleton of
Yeah.
what will eventually become the story. And then treating revision as like kind of filling that in and making it into something that is actually readable. I think it's a really hard thing for some writers to grasp, and it certainly was for me. So, but it is true, and it will actually help you long term.
I think that Liz is really, she's right. And that first draft is a skeleton. And then you go back and you add some like flesh and eyeballs and a brain to your story. And I think it was really interesting writing with Liz, going off what Liz just said, where she said that she's, she's a perfectionist and she will, which is really good when you're co-writing with a person like that. But she's also a plotter and I'm a pantser. So I think when we were writing this book a little bit, Liz would be like, we need to, no. We need to hash out this thing. And I was like, no, let's just go and we'll throw it in and we'll fix it later. And she would always say, which was really good, this is a mystery. And so we need to make sure that we have things down because things have to happen at certain places, Kathleen. Right. And so it was really, writing with Liz has improved my standalone writing.
That's fantastic.
In
many ways, because Liz will be in my head as I'm like working on this other book that I'm writing by myself. And I'll be like, no, I can't just forget about that. No, I have to address it now. Because normally I'll go off like into the ether because like she said, your first draft is the skeleton and I'm very much into like putting the bones on that skeleton.
That I love that. And co-writing is dark magic of its own. When it's hard enough coming up with a story of your own and going through your internal process and getting the words on the page, but then including another person who has ideas of their own and all of that. That is a lot of people, I think they would find that very daunting to work with someone else who's a completely different human and thinks differently and all that, and of course I see the benefit of two authors equals three creative brains in essence, but finding a way to merge those has to be interesting because both of you are published writers on your own. So how did you come to work on this together? Well, first off, how did you meet, and have you guys known each other for a while, or what's the relationship like where you connected, non-author wise, that then allowed you to collaborate?
Well, we have the same editor for our standalone books, which is why, or how, I guess, we originally connected. My debut is much more in the vein of what Kathleen's other books are, which is, emotional contemporary. And so when I realized that Kathleen was also one of our editor's writers, I was always a big fan of her. I was a huge fan of her debut, and I also managed to get an arc of her second book, which I absolutely loved. I read it on an airplane and cried on the airplane. And when I learned that, I knew she was one of Krista's writers, so I asked Krista if she might be willing to blurb. And Kathleen did, kindly blurb my debut, and we just sort of started chatting from there. And we ended up being in the DC area at the same time. What was it, Kathleen, now 3.5 years ago? Good Lord.
Yeah, for the National Book Festival.
Yeah, well, Kathleen was there for the National Book Festival. I was there visiting my sister. So
and I said we should get together. We should meet because I love The Lucky Ones, and if you haven't read it, Hank, it's a really intense and truthful and honest story about the aftermath of a school shooting. And Liz handled all the issues in that book amazingly. And it was a beautiful read. And I will always hold that book dear to my heart. And so I think that we just started messaging each other because we were just friends and we write the same things. We have the same writerly anxieties and probably like life anxieties. And so we became friends. So it was fate. And then when the first lockdown happened, Liz's book was coming out, which she can tell you about in a few minutes. Mm-hmm. And that was really hard. And then that summer, when we were messaging each other, I think that we were both feeling very isolated, as which is normal because nobody really knew what to do while all that was happening. And we were just talking, and because we both write such emotionally intense books on our own. I think we needed something fun to take our minds off things, and we weren't working on anything at the time. And Liz is a big Agatha Christie and mystery fan, and I'm a big true crime fan. And we just started chatting, like, what if we did something different? Because I do think it's really important for writers to stretch their wings,
Yeah,
and try new things. What if we did something different? What if we wrote a mystery? What if we just started writing so we could get up every day and have something to write and feel less isolated and go through this kind of terrible world thing together? But we wrote something that was fun at its core.
I love that. By the way, because I've talked to a lot of authors. My other podcast that we do, we've got 1,200 episodes where we talk to writers, and I've had an interesting time um, talking about how the pandemic has affected writers, because for the most part we're people that work from home, and we don't get out every morning and go to work. Or, I walk 15 feet to my coffee pot, and then come back and sit at my desk, and that's I see my wife and a couple of my kids, and that's kind of the extent of it for most days. And I think a lot of writers are like that. But there's something weird about knowing that the rest of the world is home working as well, and it kind of infringes on our comfy little existence. There's something
Yeah.
weird about knowing that everyone else is doing the same thing you are, and it's a little creepy sometimes. So I love that you guys found a way to, let's give ourselves something to look forward to every day. That is super important, I think, to always have a goal that you're stretching for.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Liz, we agreed. Like, she's like, okay, we need a spreadsheet. We will have to plot out this story before we even begin writing, because it is a mystery and you have to know where to put red herrings, and you need to know the twists and the
Right.
turns. And I'd never done that before, and she was great at doing that. And then we agreed, like, friendly, contractually with each other, because no one knew what we were doing. Like, our editor didn't know, and our agents didn't know. This was like purely for us.
Yeah.
And so we agreed we would make it dual POV, two characters, and that we worked out this plot, and that we would trade a chapter a day, and that we would fast draft it. And then Liz tricked me, where we got to a certain point, and I was like, "Well, this is really good. That's great." And now I have to go do some other things. And she was like, "No, wait, this is really good. I think that this could really be something." And I was like, "Nah, what are you talking about? I don't write mysteries. Nobody's gonna want a mystery from me, you know." And Liz was like, "Well, actually, I already told my agent, and she really likes it." And then I was like, "What?"
I haven't to her yet. I did not show it to her until you told me I could. But yes, I did tell her about it.
Yeah. And then it moved like very quickly. And our editor, Krista, she was like, "Wait, you did what now?" But she ended up loving it and supporting us in like this, would you call it like a genre switch, Liz?
Yeah. I mean, yes. And we're very lucky, because some writers would probably not have been afforded that. Like our imprint and our editor they're great. Like she's very flexible.
Yeah, she was very, very excited. The whole imprint was excited, and they were all basically like, "You did what?" And then they were like, "Oh my God, this is like really, this is great." And then they said, "Okay, can you finish this in like 2 months?" And we were like, "Okay."
And we're like, "What?"
I mean, what else is going on?
Yeah.
Might as well. I have so many questions. But first, the Agathas, this book is genre-wise different than what each of you do individually. And I know that you're both fans of the genre, and Liz especially, and she dragged you kicking and screaming, Kathleen, into
Oh,
it.
of course. Yeah.
Not really. Um, but does it is it easier to stretch into a different genre when you have someone else go along on the journey with you like you guys did here, or I mean, is that an unfair question because you did do it together, but do you know what I mean? Is it easier when you kind of have a partner to go along with you to stretch out into new things?
I think for us, we just approached it so almost naively. We were like, oh, let's do this. Okay, let's do this. Not thinking like too much about co-writing and the issues
Yeah.
that could arise, or the fact that it was outside. I mean, I didn't think very much about how it was outside of, our other books genres. I also didn't think about the fact that mysteries are really difficult to plot. And to write in general. So I think it was because we were just sort of approaching it from that, like, let's just do this and see what happens angle. Um, we didn't run into like that, I don't know, any of the issues that you could when you're doing it by yourself. Like when you are, all alone, overthinking and thinking like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. Because we were able to talk to each other and say like, well, we're here now. Where should we go? And, if one of us didn't have ideas, the other one did. So it was really helpful, I thought.
Yeah. It's a great experience to write a book with someone, because like Liz said, you're not alone in the story, and you're like texting all the time, and it's exciting, and you do have someone to bounce these like extraneous, beyond the spreadsheet ideas off of, and that makes it's just better. It's just interesting. It's more interesting. You're less like isolated and alone in the story, because there's someone else there and they know exactly what problems you're having, and they know exactly what to say. And on a craft level, because we did POV, we would write our chapters, and if Alice is in Iris's chapter, then Liz gets to like tweak whatever dialogue I gave Alice, because she knows Alice. And like that is good. That's a good thing. It only improves the book. And so you learn how to craft a book with someone else on that level, according to what they also need as a writer themselves. Mm-hmm. And so it's a really interesting, and I think invigorating exercise. And I like to say that it was a real relief, because I feel like I was only responsible for 50% of the book.
So one question that I think a lot of people have, when it comes to co-authoring, is how do you split the duties? Did having the different POVs, did that help to kind of assign tasks to each person? Did you feel? I guess the real question I'm asking is, did that enable you to feel more ownership over your parts, or like how did you guys decide to divide the duties? And I know it began as just a fun project, but at some part it turned into an actual book. And then did you start thinking differently about the duties that you had assigned for yourselves, or how you each approached the work? Talk about kind of divvying up those responsibilities.
Did we have duties?
I don't know.
I feel like since we had the spreadsheet, and she was really good at like putting that spreadsheet together. Like we'd talk, and then she would physically do the spreadsheet, because she's younger and has more energy than me, and because she's a plotter. And so, but I don't know that we assigned each other duties in like the actual sense of each of us would be responsible for one thing, because I don't know, we just played really well off each other, and we tried to respect each other's, like, you don't rewrite someone's chapter. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can tweak the dialogue, but we talk about that stuff. Like, we text each other. I will text Liz and say, okay, Liz, now in this chapter I'm writing, Iris goes here and this happens. And she'll be like, mm-hmm. And then maybe the next day she'll text me and she'll be like, okay, so this has to happen now for Alice, and you're going to have to tweak something in like Iris's previous chapter. So I don't know that we had like duties per se. It just seems to, I'm watching Liz's cats fight in the background. It just seems, it just seems, I don't know, it flowed really well for us.
Yeah, I think dividing it, oh, sorry, Kathleen.
No, go ahead.
No, I think dividing it between the two POVs was really helpful because it really did give us each control over those sections. Like Kathleen is saying, you know, we didn't infringe on each other's chapters, like outside of maybe saying like, oh, I'm not sure that Alice would say this, like, you know, or like plot things that we would suggest to each other. And then in terms of, because the book does have a lot of mixed media sections, and those just, we sort of just,
I guess we divided those up.
Kind of, but we didn't like really plan out who was writing which. We just sort of like went with it, and whoever's chapter needed it. I don't know. It was just sort of more organic than that.
Yeah, if it was like a, you know, because we'd be like, okay, we need a breaking news segment here, and then it would be like, oh, Liz would say, oh, I'll write that, or we'd be like, oh, we need some text messages here, and I'd be like, okay, I'll put in some text messages, and then we could each go in and like tweak those as we saw it, you know, and then Liz would say, we need a news article, and I'd be like, okay, why don't you write the news article? Because she reads heavy.com and I don't. And so
I don't read heavy.com, but I know
and so, you know, it was just, I think that you have to, I was just really grateful to write a book with someone. And it was nice to have someone else in that whole process with you. So it didn't really matter who was doing what with like extraneous material. It just worked out really well. It was one of the most pleasurable experiences of my writing life. And I have talked before about how before my first book was published, what a great quiet experience that was, because I never thought it would get published. I didn't have anyone in my head. I had no expectations. I only had the story because no one knew what I was doing. I wasn't, you know, I hadn't even like started any social media accounts, and I didn't know many other novelists. And when we were writing the Agathas together and no one knew, I felt really comfortable and like happy writing this story of these two girls who become friends while solving a crime, because no one knew. So we had no expectations hanging over our head. We didn't have anyone saying, no, you shouldn't put that in there. Or, no, you shouldn't write a book this way. It was just really, it was like a really beautiful, quiet, fun time with Liz.
Mm-hmm.
You are 100% right about that feeling before your first book is published, because no one has any expectations whatsoever. It's just you and the story, maybe a loved one, a spouse or something that you kind of clued in, hey, I'm doing this thing. But there's a pureness to that and a pure joy that comes from that. And it sounds like you guys got to recreate that for a second time. At least in the beginning, you know, before agents were, you know, were demanding manuscripts and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So tell me about the book. Liz, you're a fan of Agatha Christie mysteries. Kathleen, you're a true crime fan. When you first start kind of spitballing and, you know, all of the great creative, you know, neurons are firing and, you know, the stories, you know, kind of magically start coming together. What was the thing that you, what was the hook that you came up with?
Well, it's based on an Agatha Christie's disappearance from from her first husband. So she found out her first husband was cheating on her, and it's sort of like this like almost like a Agatha Christie lore about how she disappeared for, I think it was, Kathleen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was like 12 days, 14 days.
Yeah, I think,
something like that. And nobody really to this day knows where she went. She was discovered about, like I said, about 2 weeks after she disappeared in a hotel in London. She seemed like very discombobulated. claimed she didn't really have a lot of memory about what had happened. And it's
I think she checked in under her husband's mistress's
that's
name.
right. Which is like so,
Snap.
so amazing.
Okay, I've read enough Agatha Christie novels. Who in their idiotic mind would ever cheat on that woman? That's
right.
okay. Okay.
Yeah. There's actually a fictional retelling I read last year called The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, I think it's called. And it sort of tackles her disappearance from a fictional standpoint. But it's really interesting because you learn about her first marriage and how he was sort of, not the best guy. He was a little bit
Right.
jealous of her burgeoning success and yes, and started cheating on her. So we I think both have been fascinated by that story for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, what if a teenage girl was a big fan of Agatha Christie and because of that decided to kind of pull an Agatha Christie?
And that's what Alice does. Like, that's how the book begins. And then that whole, when her friend Brooke disappears, the police dismiss it as you're just copycatting Alice Ogilvie and girls are too emotional. And she just ran away and is faking it for a few days. And because those things happen. So
Right.
that was like our jumping off point for the book and the story. And it is I think it's an overall fun story with some really great fun elements in it. But we do have that little thread running through of like real life issues, domestic abuse for Iris and parental neglect for Alice, and then also the misogyny that accompanies teen girlhood, where you're dismissed as being inconsequential and your fears and emotions are downplayed.
Do you feel like that your individual strengths, Liz, with your love of mystery and the way that you had become well versed just in your love of the genre, or Kathleen, your love of true crime? Do you feel like you mentioned earlier, where do we put the red herrings? Um, did your love of true crime kind of help inform? Um, the plotting of it, like, well, that's not really going to work because so and so may have tried that before, and they obviously telegraphed what was going on. Were there things like that where your individual strengths helped, or maybe you relied on one another and what you knew the other was bringing to the project to help strengthen the project as a whole?
Liz is excellent at plotting a mystery and knowing about tropes that need to appear in mysteries and about hitting writerly beats in mysteries, like where action needs to
Right.
happen at each point in the novel. And I'm very much like the problem child because I would like text her like 3 days before a draft is due and be like, so, I was listening to this radio thing and I was hearing like this thing about like this grandmother and these two grandsons and like this murder. And like, I was thinking, or, I'll be like, well, I was watching Forensic Files. And then Liz would be like, oh, okay. And, she would be like, okay, all right, we can make that work. So I feel like our interests like blend really well together, but Liz might have a different opinion.
No, I absolutely agree. I think that like because I did grow up reading a lot of mysteries like Agatha Christie, but I also loved a lot of like cozy mystery series when I was younger. That was the sort of book I envisioned in terms of like plot and in terms of tone, I guess. But Kathleen's love of true crime was like super helpful because like she had these ideas that like were amazing and based in real life. So we knew that they were like plausible, which is really helpful.
Yeah. Like
And
they happen.
Yeah. And so,
Right.
yeah, there's absolutely some Kathleen true crime stuff in the Agathas.
Yeah. And
which is great.
Liz was really great about, keeping it like this general mystery tone for the novel. And sometimes I would try to drag it like into a different emotional space, like one of my own standalone books. She'd be like, no, you need to pull back. And then you can envision like Liz, being a mystery novelist, drinking tea and like plotting something out. And then I send her a text like, okay, but wait, but we have to think about the angle that somebody was stabbed. It depends on how tall they are. And like, here's how much blood. And so I think
all important things though. Like,
Yeah.
right. So, we worked well on that level. I don't know, a lot of people after they found out that we co-wrote this book, they were like, well, maybe I should co-write with somebody. And I was like, well, you have to find absolutely the right person, because it's not, I mean, it was fun for us, but it's not an easy process. And you have to find the right person. It's not something you can just be like, oh, I think I'll co-write a book with you. Because it's not gonna, we were lucky to have each other.
We were very lucky.
So speaking of that, I've heard people that have co-authored books together, they talk about this weird thing that happens, that you have Kathleen Glasgow that comes in, and you have Liz Lawson who comes in, and then somewhere along the process, it's almost like a third person is writing the book. It's this mixture of the two of you that becomes something else. And some people, like, it's so much of a thing for them, they actually write under a pseudonym that is a third person. Now, you guys did not write under a pseudonym for this book, but did you ever find like in the writing of this, it's almost like it's not me writing, it's this other person, even though I absolutely had input into it, but the melding of the two of you becomes something different. Did you guys ever experience that?
Liz, did we create like a hybrid Liz Kathleen writer model?
Liz Lean.
Liz Lean.
Liz Lean, oh my. Did we? Maybe a little bit. I mean, we had to write not only our characters' POVs, but I at first when we were writing like the first few pages of the Agathas, I was definitely, it took me a minute to get into the groove of writing Iris too. I felt like nervous about that more than I ever have, obviously writing like a solo book. And then we also had to like learn to write the other characters, the supporting cast in the same way. So, I haven't really thought about it, but I think that, we probably did a bit.
Yeah, we very much had to, and that's where like the co-writing and being flexible comes in, because Liz really knows Alice, and like I really know Iris, and that's why you have to be very flexible and get that hybrid Liz Lean going, where that other person can go into the other POV and say, okay, you have to change this because Iris wouldn't say that, or here's how Iris actually is feeling in this moment. Because we had to talk about how our characters would grow throughout the book. What changes they would have, and how their friendship would, have peaks and valleys, because they are very unlikely friends from different parts of life. And so, you have to remind each other of that. So you have to be like flexible. Like some things I know about Iris instinctively, because now I'm really close to her, that Liz might not know. And the same thing goes for Alice. And so Liz has to go in and say, Kathleen, Alice would not say this. She would say this. And then just be like, okay, great. Because that just makes it better. You have to realize that like everybody's input, it makes it better.
Yeah.
So I think if you're like a super controlling writer, you should probably not be a co-writer.
Agreed.
You should probably take that off your bucket list, because it's not going to work. You have to be flexible and open and realize that everything is for the benefit of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. The people who co-write books as their debut are like fascinating to me, because that would be so challenging, I think.
Yeah.
Because, once you have your first book out there, you've gone through like having tons of different input, tons of different hands on it. You're kind of used to getting that feedback. But I remember when I wrote my first couple manuscripts, I was like, don't touch them, like I was very precious with them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that would be really challenging.
Because nobody tells you, that first book that you have published and you get your publishing deal and you've like really worked for maybe years on crafting your novel, and your editor's like, I love it so much, and here's your book deal. And then you turn it in, and then your editor's like, okay, we're gonna cut like 100 pages from the middle because that's not, and you're like, but wait a minute, you said it was so great. But they are also now looking at it from outside eyes, and they know they can tell you because they're not as close to it as you are. And I don't know that a lot of people know that when they're getting their first book published, is that sometimes entire like 100 pages are rewritten, and your editor's like, no, you're not seeing how this is not working. And that can feel really daunting to, I think, debut novelists, because they're like, but you said you loved it.
And that is especially daunting for a first book, because like you said, a lot of times there have been years that have gone into that book, and inevitably authors bare their souls in their first book almost always, because it's so much of you comes out in it. And I heard a musician on an interview one time, and they were talking about why a lot of bands' first album is amazing a lot of times, because they've had years to just work on those songs and work on those songs. And usually by the third album, they're buying mansions and they're picking out curtains, so life goes on. But that first work is usually so personal, and to have someone chop out, when you get those edits back from your editor and you're like, whoa, someone spilled a bucket of red ink on here, what's the problem? Yeah, it can be daunting, especially for a first book.
Yeah, I think a lot about Karen McManus. Like several years ago, I recently tried to find the tweet, actually, because it sticks in my head. Like, I think about it all the time. She said something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, like, writers, it is so challenging to be a writer because you want to like be able to have that soul bared to the world. But once you have that first book out, there's so much that you realize you need to hold back in order to even write a second book. That you have to figure out how to balance those two things, and it can be a real challenge.
Yeah. Kathleen, you mentioned genre tropes a few minutes ago, and that Liz was well versed in the mystery tropes. When writing a book, tropes are essential, so that people that love the genre know what to expect. And not always, there are mysteries within the mystery, but uh, you have to know how to craft a story that's going to fit within a genre and meet certain expectations. It sounds weird to say that, but that's the reality of it. But some of the greatest books take those tropes and kind of twist them a little bit, and keep the reader wondering, and throw people kind of off kilter when reading it. And that's some of the funnest part of writing, is taking those tropes and things that people expect and just twisting them a little bit, and giving people a different experience with it. What do y'all think about tropes and the proper way to use them, and when it's okay to um, pull the rug out from under a reader, so to speak?
Liz.
Thanks, Kathleen. That is a very, that's a very hard question to answer, honestly. I mean, I think that tropes are important because, particularly when you're writing genre fiction, like you're writing romance or you're writing a mystery, like you said, people have certain expectations for them. I think of the romance community and how people get up in arms sometimes when there's not a happily ever after ending. which to me makes sense. You know, you have a certain expectation when you open that book, and you, as a reader, are probably reading it in part because you want that expectation to be fulfilled. So I think that the writers who handle subverting genre or subverting tropes the best are the ones who do it in a minimal way, usually, like in a way that isn't just like out of the blue. Maybe it's set up throughout the book, and then all of a sudden, you know, I'm thinking about like We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. Like,
Yeah.
you know, that she certainly pulled the rug out from under readers, but it was set up. It has to be set up throughout the book in a way that if a reader did a second read, they would be able to see it. And I think that that is incredibly important. You have to like plan it if you're planning to do that. And it can't just be sort of like a haphazard, like, I'm going to just trick the reader, because readers don't like to be tricked.
Do you have any opinions about tropes and their proper usage, Kathleen?
I think that you will probably, especially for the mystery genre, I think it's important to have certain tropes in the book. And then if you're subverting them, make sure that you're doing it intelligently so that it feeds the story that you're trying to tell in that particular book. And I think you can definitely pull the rug out from under people's feet if you've set everything up so that that rug pulling works. And in terms, you know, there are a lot of teenage detective tropes, you know, on TV and in books. And I think Liz and I were in agreement that as we were writing this book, we had to always remember that Alice and Iris are actual teenagers, and they don't know how to solve a mystery. Like, they're not naturally mystery smart like you might see in a TV show where there's a mystery and there are teens.
Right.
Like Alice, they're taking tips from a book. They're using, you know, techniques from Agatha Christie books. They're using things that maybe Iris has seen on TV. They also have to do their homework. So sometimes they can't go on a stakeout or stay out as long as they wanted. They have interpersonal strife with their friends and ex-boyfriends and parents. And so it was important for us also to kind of subvert that trope of like teens just being so savvy and they know exactly how to solve this crime. And they've got all these like tools at their fingertips, and there's, you know, they can hack into somebody's computer like right away, which one character does, but we set that up for him as being that kind of person.
Yeah.
That's not Alice or Iris. And I feel like we did that really well. Like, they get better as the book progresses, but they also make a lot of mistakes that, you know, are not great for the people that they affect. And so I think that for us, that it was really important to show their growth as detectives and that they're still learning.
Do you feel like that this co-authoring experience will change the stories that you tell in the future? Kathleen, do you feel like there's, something that Liz gave you as an author that you will carry forward? And Liz, do you feel like that there's anything of Kathleen that will carry forward in your writing?
Absolutely. I mean, Kathleen she says she's not good at plotting, but she's really good with ideas. Like, she doesn't live well. I mean that in such a in complimentary way. Like, she doesn't. I found, like, writing the book with her, she doesn't let the like confines of like again, this is meant in a very complimentary way, but like reality, sort of like put walls up about what she doesn't let it like confine what the story could be. So she is like very much an outside the box thinker, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And from like the first book I wrote, I have like learned more and more how to be that way, but I've always approached writing from like a very timid place for some reason. And I was like, the story needs to be like this. And like, I can't do that because like, it would even be like, I can't do that because like, I wouldn't even think of that as a possibility for what could happen. But she's really like opened my mind in terms of like the possibilities and the directions that a story can go.
I love that. Will we see any more from these characters? Was this a one-off experience for you guys to co-author and in this world with these characters, or in the future, is there any possibility to continue the story?
Well, I think that that's up to readers. You know, you have to buy the book. You have to show how much you love Alice and Iris and these two girls. A story. It's just very much a friendship story in the middle of a mystery in a small town. We'd love to keep writing these books. Like I could write these books with Liz forever. We could take Alice and Iris, you know, through their 20s. We could see what happens to them as young women. I mean, is Alice going to set up a shingle someday and become a private investigator? What will happen to I? You know, I mean, like
Right.
the possibilities are endless, and I really do hope that I really do hope we get to write another one because we have a lot of ideas.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Great. Well, the book, The Agathas, comes out the first of what it's the first week of May, right?
Yeah.
May 3rd.
May 3rd.
May 3rd. Great. Go pre-order it now. We'll put links in the show notes where you can go pre-order it, or on release day, go to your local bookstore, support local bookstores and grab it there. Kathleen, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they connect with you online?
They can go on Twitter at Kath Glasgow, or Instagram at Miss Kathleen Glasgow, or TikTok at Kathleen Glasgow. And you can find me at my website, which is KathleenGlasgowBooks.com.
Excellent. What about you, Liz? Where can people connect with you?
I'm on social media as at LZLWSN, so my name with no vowels, and my
Makes perfect sense.
very Urban Outfitters of me, and I have an author website, LizLawsonAuthor.com.
Excellent. We'll link up all of that, those places in the show notes to make it easy for folks to find you. Kathleen, Liz, this has been so much fun chatting. We're going to send everyone to pick up their copy of The Agathas. I love the book so much. I know other folks are too. Thank you so much for taking time to come join us in the Storycraft Cafe.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.